welcome to the second season of the Ecologies of Danger podcast. Ecologies of Danger is a project produced by the students of a course on environmental security at Colgate University. In this season, we look at the different ways in which the environment has become a security issue. In this episode, Pawhite examines the deeper story behind the water crisis in Flint, Michigan.
Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night and you're parched, so you go to your kitchen and fill a glass with water from the sink. Before drinking the water, you look and notice that it's brown and it's almost opaque. There's no telling that the water from your own faucet is safe to drink. This was the reality for many of the residents of Flint, Michigan, beginning in 2014.
My water's been brown since the switch.
The rashes, the hair loss, the muscle stiffness, the soreness.
My family broke out in a rash that we were told looks like scabies, but it wasn't scabies.
The water going into many homes throughout the city is foul-smelling and badly discolored.
As it turns out, most of those homes belong to African American families. And that's why activists say the Flint water crisis is a clear case of environmental racism. You might be asking yourself, how can the environment be racist? Here's how one reporter from Al Jazeera puts it.
Environmental racism. It's about policies and practices that discriminate against communities of color by making them live near landfills, sewage plants, and other polluting facilities.
Basically, it's a statistical fact that poor communities of color are disproportionately exposed to toxic environments and pollution. Exhibit A, Flint, Michigan. Here's what happened. The local government in Flint decided to switch their water supply to the Flint River from Detroit in 2014 in order to save money. They didn't realize just how much it would actually end up costing them. Shortly after making the switch, residents were concerned about what health effects the water was having on them. Researchers from Virginia Tech tested the water coming out of the tap in Flint, and what they found was striking. The lead level in the water was 880 times the EPA's recommended limit for the amount of lead in drinking water. This lead-tainted water could cause serious and irreversible damage. Research has shown that in children, a lower amount of lead can have a greater effect on brain development than it does on adults. The citizens of Flint, Michigan were being poisoned by their own government, and it seemed like there was nothing they could do to stop it. How can a community be so helpless to the oppression it's facing? And why do some communities see this so much more than others? Dr. Robert Bullard of Texas Southern University points to the critical issue within environmental racism, the intersection of poverty and race that allows governments to take advantage of communities.
Racism trumps class. Even middle-income African Americans are more likely to live in more polluted neighborhoods. Zip code is the most powerful predictor of health, and all communities and all zip codes are not created equal.
Dr. Bullard's argument is clear in Michigan. Flint is predominantly black. 41% of Flint residents live below the poverty line. The unemployment rate is 13%. Race and class in the city intersect to create circumstances that are unhealthy to live in. Industries and government itself both overlook regulations for environmental safety, such as water and air quality. They get away with this in these communities because there are systems built on white privilege. The water crisis in Flint, Michigan also highlights that many people are to blame for letting the situation spiral so far out of control. Some blame the elected officials at the time for turning a blind eye just so they could save some money. Some citizens even directly questioned Howard Croft, the director of public utilities in Flint.
No way you should let it slide by without a corrosion control. No way.
And
if we had that in place, we at least would have started off in the right direction. We didn't start this whole Flint River piece off in the right direction.
Okay,
but you got to put the things in place to be able to do that.
He asked you one question. Mm-hmm. Why did you think that was important in the first place? It's about corrosion. Why did you think that was important in the first place? I am angry that I am doing this stuff and drinking this water and doing this stuff, and I could die before my time. Why didn't y'all think about that?
Blame has been placed on officials for failing to use corrosion control in the water. Researchers state that using something to help with the corrosion of the lead pipes transporting water to Flint residents could have potentially prevented 90% of the lead poisoning that came after the switch. While I believe that the officials in Flint are not blame-free, they do not fully own this disaster. In fact, This case of Flint, Michigan's water is an example of how environmental racism can work in two ways. The first is that an environmental crisis like this can serve to expose the underlying injustice within the government. The failures of the politicians to adequately handle the situation only help to highlight the racist structures that have been working in Flint for many years. Studies have shown that in Michigan, those who are of a minority race are more likely to pay more for water and sewage. Not only are communities of color more likely to be exposed to the negative impacts of the environment, they also pay more for necessary environmental resources. In Flint, the pipes used to transport water were severely deteriorated because they've been given no attention in decades. Unfortunately, this is common in urban neighborhoods. The quality of life for non-white individuals has been overlooked by state governments and at the national level. In fact, the EPA has an office dedicated to protecting the environmental civil rights of Americans. Unsurprisingly, it has never actually found any case of discrimination. The water crisis in Flint exposed the underlying systems of racism and oppression that have been in place for the entirety of this nation's existence. The second way that environmental racism rears its ugly head is as the actual vehicle for injustice. The corrosiveness of the pipes in Flint was not the only environmental concern with their water. Flint once had a booming economy that was focused on the manufacture of cars. This dwindled at the end of the 20th century, but the environmental impact of the plants remained behind in Flint. The car factories had been pumping lead and other harmful substances into the water and air of Michigan for years. So, these communities live in a more polluted environment and are not even given the guarantee of access to clean water or air. Flint, Michigan is a clear example of how certain lives are valued less in America. Environmental racism has even been likened to the violence Black Americans face with police brutality. Supporters say that these are both ways that people of color are murdered at the hands of the government. Jamie Swift, a journalist and activist, believes that the issue of environmental racism needs more attention, just as the Black Lives Matter movements have exposed police brutality.
And we have to include environmental racism and discrimination in our landscape because we are being killed. As you can see in Flint, not only that in Baltimore with the rising lead pollution, we really need to address this issue face on and head on before it gets worse.
The Flint water crisis, along with other examples of environmental racism, reinforce that different lives have different values. No one can deny the oppression of poor people of color in America. Eventually in Flint, Michigan's elected officials had to face the music and own up to the critical misjudgments they made in the water crisis. The city's water system switched back to Detroit's supply, a state of emergency was declared, and bottled water was delivered to the homes where clean water was not yet a guarantee. Most importantly, though, the individuals who allowed the disaster to happen were not let off the hook. The ACLU and citizens of Flint hit many of the state officials with lawsuits, and the Michigan government was forced to replace the pipes in Flint. It seems like a happy ending, but in reality, many of the residents of Flint will not know how much the lead has affected them until later down the road, and some still do not have access to clean water. This case did get media attention, but there's no nationwide movement to end environmental racism. We can celebrate one small victory in holding perpetrators accountable for the oppression of people of color. However, there's still work to be done. We have to continue to fight these long-standing racist structures so that one day, no one has to fear being poisoned by their own tap. For Colgate University, I'm Pammy White.